So here at Ecstatic, we give a lot of advice, but we are not above hearing constructive criticism. And that's part of today's topic, continuous learning. And no matter how awesome you think you are, and we are pretty awesome, there's probably a little bit more to learn. So today we have a guest with us, Brian, who has about 20 to 25 years experience in advertising and marketing in Manhattan with various firms, various senior positions. So first, I think maybe let's just try and establish a little bit of his credibility background first. Brian, maybe you could just share some highlights.
Yeah, first and foremost, like, who the hell are you guys? And what the hell am I doing?
We are at Ecstatic. I thought we started with that, right?
Yeah, we're at Ecstatic, and really this is kind of an excuse for the five of us to hang out and yap about stuff and blame this all on our Gen Z and millennial producers who thought this might be a good idea. We completely disagree, but that's why we're here.
Yeah, I questioned who would actually listen to us when they first came to me with the idea. I said, "Come on, we're just regular guys. Is anyone really going to listen to us? You think?" And
Regular guys, come on.
and see how bad we are. The question was, who are you guys? So I am Adam.
Oh, I'll be Gary today.
I'm Johnny.
And I am Ed.
And remotely
And
we
I'm
have.
Oh yeah, we got Ray. Go ahead.
I'm Ray.
Hi, Ray.
I'm Ray. Hello.
All right. And what the second question, what you're doing here is to, once we're convinced that you actually have some legitimate background, you're here to give us advice, tell us what we're doing right, tell us what we're doing wrong, tell us that, no, we're not suffering from imposter syndrome. It's really, you guys really are imposters, whatever you think is helpful.
Okay. So as far as my background, I mean, you pretty much summed it up. I've been in advertising for the last 26 years, and I've been trying to figure a way to get the hell out of it for the last 25 and a half. With good reason. It's not as glamorous a profession as it's made out to be in a lot of cases.
Is it made out to be glamorous? Because
In the movies, it seems kind of cool.
I got into it thinking it would be all, wine, women, and song, and it just wasn't that case.
just wine and women.
So it's not like the movie What Women Want, not like the Mel Gibson.
No, it did start out, when I started, it was a bit like Mad Men.
Oh.
Now, in my first year in advertising, when I first started, I really did think it was going to be this world of glamour and excitement. And there was one occasion I'll just bring up was I ended up in a penthouse in the plaza on a Wednesday at 6 a.m., waking up in a bathtub with no recollection as how I got there, right? And that was actually not uncommon for the early 90s in advertising. So it was a very different world. It is come a long way. I mean, when I first started, it was all newspaper, magazines, billboards. Podcasts didn't come around until the last 8 to 10 years, and they really exploded in the last 5 or 6. I would say. I think there were some doubts as to whether or not the pandemic was going to squash them, because one of the primary ways that people would listen was when they're commuting. Right. And when people stopped commuting, would podcasts actually suffer? That's not really the case. Right. There's a huge audience out there for podcasts. And I think in the younger generations, it's become almost second nature to have it as background noise, much like when we grew up, we were probably just listening to the radio. Right. And, you'd have your little tape recorder listening for certain songs and like trying to record them. But now, you've got everything on demand. And the younger generation's a bit more curious than us. They've got many more avenues to get information, and podcasts has become incredibly popular with the younger generation. So
wait, let me just interrupt a second. So when you're not working on the plumbing on a bathtub, how much money flows through your desk or on your projects? How much money are you allocating to different mediums on a typical day or a typical project? What are we talking about?
I mean, that's a very loaded question. That's going to depend significantly. I mean, one of my last clients was the largest tax preparer in the world, right? I'm not going to mention their name, but you could probably guess who that might be, right? We spent well over $150 million in 4 months during tax season.
That's about how much the podcast here is pulling in.
Maybe a better...
rounding up to the nearest 150 million.
Maybe something better would have been to ask them in what not as much the money, but in what segments did you put it in?
Well, that's where I'm relating to. When you have that kind of money, it's more of where you're not going to put it, right? And you have to always start with the audience, right? That's the first thing you need to think about, which is what I would say to you all is like the first thing you need to think about is who your end user is, who's the audience going to be, and why should they give a shit about what you're saying, right? And the first thing you always have to think about is whether or not your audience is actually using the medium that you're communicating in. So when I was thinking about where to place budgets, the first thing I think about is where's the audience? How am I going to motivate them? Right? What are their needs? Like, what am I going to fulfill for them? One of the biggest mistakes that content creators make, and this is one I think you can talk about a little bit further, is what I call Field of Dreams syndrome.
If you build, they'll come.
Yeah, if you build it, they'll come.
That's what Stevie told us.
Yeah. So it's another way to put it would be marginal value theorem, right? Like, in order to get people to come, what you're providing them has to provide more value to them than what they would have been doing otherwise. Right? So what is your audience doing right now? Right? Where are they getting the information that you're trying to provide? You've got to be more valuable than them. And I'd suggest the way to do that would be really succinct, be funny, be amusing. And you have to think about the audience of the mindset of the audience. My daughter and I are history buffs, right? On the way here, we were listening to a podcast from 1852, right?
They have podcasts in 1852?
Yeah, I have an old car, so it's got an old radio. So it gets a lot of older stations, right?
Fantastic.
Yeah, so we were like, let's tune into the finance station, right? So we tuned into these 5 guys, right, from 1852, and they're talking to the younger generation. You had like, what were they? There was a cooper, a cobbler, a cartographer, and like a blacksmith or something, right? And they're telling the younger generation, you got to learn our trade, right? You got to, and this will get you to earn money. Then you open up your own blacksmith shop, you open up your own cobbler shop, right? It's like the next generation's like Tesla and Marconi were in that next generation. They're listening to that going, the hell are they talking about? Like, blacksmith's going to be gone. Like, I'm inventing electricity. Marconi's like, yeah, I'm going to use that shit to create radio. Like, I'm not going to go make shoes. Like, it's going to be a completely different world that next generation was going into. It's a shame too, because my daughter really wanted to be a cartographer. But like, that's what I think you need to think about is the fact that you're talking about models and ways that you've generated your own personal success that I don't think is going to exist for the next generation. Like, you talked a bit about college. You talked about not going to college in your last podcast, right?
How many of our podcasts have you listened to?
One.
Okay, so we have a chance to recover.
That's a good
Yeah, we
thing.
do.
No, that's a fair point. All
Yeah,
right,
because it's very different, which is I didn't think it would go different, but it did. So.
I think it's easy to agree that like in 200 years, yeah, things are going to be completely different and what we say is going to be completely irrelevant. But do you really think in 20 to 30 years, what we have and what we're doing today is going to be essentially irrelevant?
Do you think the speed with which technology is advancing is increasing?
So I'm going to
slowing down?
We need a pushback card from. I'm going to push back.
No.
So what we've been pushing is not go to college, learn something, be successful in a career. It's don't rely on just a salary to be successful. And that's going to probably be going on forever. I mean, you're always going to want to be able to figure out ways to make money outside of just a job, whether you went to college to get this job or something else.
Yeah, and whether it's paper, or metals, or crypto, whatever the medium is.
But real quick, maybe we should have talked about it before. Can we listen to his point of view completely and take notes, or should we hit at every
No, let's
one that
fight,
he
man.
does?
Let's go at it.
I hear what.
No, go ahead, Ed. I was just going to say, do we just if we're getting pissed off, let that like boil over, or do we let the steam
there's no
out
reason
as
to get
we
pissed
go? No, I'm not getting
Listen, if
pissed
we
off
can have
at
a
all. This is
conversation
great.
about religion one of these times, I don't think this is going to be that upsetting.
Yeah, I think let the Steve out a little bit of the
I
time.
know where this is coming from. I thought you guys were a bit agreeable on the last call. I think you need people to come in and argue. That's what I think. Because then you're going to get richer to debate. You're going to get better stuff. So I'm coming in contrarian, and I may not even believe what I'm saying. I may be more aligned with what I think, but I'm just trying to make this a little bit, I want to get a little bit deeper.
See, I
get a
actually
better
like
understanding of
contrary
what you really
point of
think.
views if it's accurate though. So don't make it up. Well, if you truly feel it's accurate, I want to hear it. Like I want to.
Well, with
see
that
it from
question,
his
do we
point
think
of view.
the pace of technology evolution is increasing or decreasing. I think we all agree it's increasing.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying,
Yes.
Ryan. In fact, we went to a museum recently when we were on vacation, and they had some information on there saying that the students that are in college now, the jobs that they're going to be in, they aren't even there yet. They haven't been created. And so I think there's a lot of truth to what you're saying. But I think as much as things change, such as your example of the 1850s, the cobbler, the blacksmith, there are certain things that blacksmith had, certain traits in their character that younger generation still needs: self-discipline, motivation, responsibility, accountability, and that won't change.
And I'm going to tie this right back to religion, Gary.
Go ahead.
So the value of all good mythologies, organized religions included, is the patterns, that the patterns are repeatable, right? So the blacksmith may still have the same type of business challenges or issues with customers as the software developer might have, or the guy who runs the shop that sells levitation equipment or teleportation equipment, right? So it's the patterns that do repeat, if you believe that people really don't change a whole lot.
So I think we need to let Ray jump in, because I know when you're not here, it's harder to speak. So Ray, I'm sure you have something to say.
Well, I would say I kind of agree with you guys, but I also agree with Brian, right? That things are going to change. So depending on what you talk about, right? If you're talking about the traits that Adam just described, people's business traits, right? Those are probably going to have to be there no matter what. But there's other things Brian might have been talking about, like, when we're talking about like investing for your future, right? Well, is the stock market still going to be there, or in a form that makes sense to what we're saying? We don't know, right? Maybe AI turns it on its head and becomes worthless because it's predictable at that point. So I think it goes both ways.
And I think the other thing, to Brian's point that he was mentioning about things changing, I think the outlook, the priorities and values of the younger generation may change. For instance, they might feel, wow, we just had COVID a couple of years ago. No one saw that coming. And so why am I really going to focus on saving for the future? Why don't I just live it up now? Because who knows what's coming in three more years. And so their attitudes and their values and priorities might be a little bit different than ours is. And that's not to say that it's right or wrong. It's just simply different.
I still think we got to give this generation the fundamentals, just like we learned them. And I can tell you one thing in my industry, electricians, plumbers, welders, control technicians, the average age of them is like 58, 60, and they're not going anywhere. If you could tell me how some Elon Musk is going to invent the way that you don't need plumbing, you don't need transference of all this thing, then I'd have this conversation. But I think my reason for at least wanting to, obviously, if you listen to different podcasts, it's because our family has a lot of kids. You want them to start to think the same way. But all of the generation that I know in our circle, and I'll take this town, they're broke. For lack of a better word, they have no money. They have much, I don't want to say, like I think we talked about trying to, I don't want to say no ambition, but their point of view is different than mine. But still, you still got to go to the store. You still got to take some type of money out of your pocket and pay for what you want. And it just seems like I don't see how they're going to get to that point, married to that sort of lax point of view, right? So we have to put out there what jobs are available, which ones are more lucrative than others. These are the tools that we use, and hopefully it'll evolve in their brain to put it into context to the things that are real in their life.
But you're kind of making a value judgment there too on what folks want, right? Maybe laying on the couch all day, because I'm a gamer, eating Fritos and getting fat is what I love. And you know what? Yeah, it's unhealthy. I may die before my 35th birthday, but that'd be an awesome life. I'm all for it. That's great. I don't need to take.
If they're not able to pay their bills every month, they can't be too happy.
Well, fair point.
I know
right.
a few of them
Fair
is
point.
what I'm getting to. Like, I know a few of them, I've been able to follow them from, when I met them when they were 20, 21, and now they're 30. They're completely different. And now they're listening to what I told them when they were 21. They're like, I should have listened, right? So really, we're just
There's
trying to...
only a podcast, so tell these people now.
Well, think about it. What do you do? If you don't say anything, how's it going to evolve? How is it going to, sit in that brain and sort of bounce around until maybe 30, maybe 35, maybe 45?
Yeah. Well, and maybe that's part of the appeal, right? We make some statements on our webpage about early retirement, and that can be appealing even if you're on the couch, gamer, eating Fritos, right? And listening to the podcast is how to get there, really, and it is about discipline. I don't know if we've had an episode on discipline yet, but discipline it can be to a fault at some point. Do you have any examples of tough days at work that you had to work against some type of adversity to get to a point of relative success at the end of the day?
Sure, I've had plenty. Before I get into any of those stories, I did want to say just one thing, because Johnny, I totally get what you're saying. I completely agree with you. I think what it is there are universal truths that are going to transcend generations, right? There are traits that people can have. I guess discipline could be one. I would say the most defining traits of anyone being successful in any generation, any time in history, would be ambition and curiosity, right? If you got those, you're golden. Right? If you don't have those, I don't care what you do, you're just not going to progress. Right? So there are things you can apply in different generations, but when you get into the details, like that's where everything gets muddled, because, my daughter's generation, right? We're talking now, we're getting into preteen and lower than that. There's just this massive wave of depression because the view of the future is horrendous. Right? All they're hearing is the climate's getting destroyed. There's war all over the world, right? There's nothing you can do about it. So their mindset has to shift, right? Not from how do you fix the world's problems? Because that's, I think, where Gen Z right now is really stuck. Like that's a hell of a burden to put on them. Like they're not necessarily so focused on just the how do I get to financial security? It's like, how am I going to freaking survive? Right? Because like the world's going to hell fast. Right, according to everything they're hearing. So the mindset of trying to fix all these problems, I think, is what's causing all the depression. Right,
and I think that's a good point.
And I would get towards like a new mindset should be adaptation. Right, like ambition and curiosity are the traits, but the vision should be all about adaptation. Those that can figure out the way to adapt to the changing climate or adapt to the changing political structures, they're the ones that are going to be the most successful in the future.
So I'm on board with that, because I was going to say, well, this generation has a reason to be depressed.
Yeah.
There are a lot of things that are effed up that are going on, and it is an unfair burden. So adaptability to the extent that one can adapt to this. Will it be a situation that is beyond adaptation? I don't know, but I tend to agree with that. So I think what are the old 3 R's? Reading, writing, arithmetic. I think the new 3 R's is more about resilience, right? Relationships, and I think what's another R word for adaptation? Resourcefulness, maybe. Right? That is what it's going to come down to.
And I'm glad you brought that point up, Brian. Earlier this week, I actually read this great quote that states, "Life is a journey to be experienced, not a problem to be solved." And it came from one of the great thinkers of our time, Winnie the Pooh.
So you started off with saying that...
Wait, we get a dad joke in there. Or don't you mean one of the great stinkers of all time? Okay, there we go.
I think we have to always make time for Ray to jump in, otherwise he won't be able to. Ray, what do you got to say?
Wake up,
What
Ray.
I had to say. So I wanted to backtrack on something that Adam and Brian said. So you've mentioned adaptation, and you also mentioned, that the jobs of the future won't even exist and all that kind of stuff. And Adam was using an example of a gamer sitting on the couch eating Fritos, right? Like that is something that's really was disturbing to me a while ago, right? When Noah was, trying to play video games and wanted to play all the time, and he was really good and wanted to play and become a pro and all that kind of stuff. And we fought it like, to tooth and nail. But let's face it, like there's going to be gaming platforms out there that are professional. They already are, right? People are going to make a lot of money at, and those are jobs that will exist in the future. And there'll be pro players just like Michael Jordan or anybody else. There's going to be pro gamers that are at that level and make that kind of money and have that kind of, popularity.
So how do you feel about crushing your son's dreams and hopes for financial security?
Well, that's exactly that's it.
Ray, I've got
Right, so
tons of clients who have paid gamers 6 figures to sponsor them.
Wow.
6 figures from
Exactly,
known
right?
brands to associate with gamers.
Yeah, and I have it comes and goes, right? I have these thoughts about like, did I screw it up? Should I have let Noah, go do those things? And I'm not convinced yet that we made the wrong decision, but I still don't know if it was the right decision, right? So we should all just be conscious of the fact that we don't actually know what we're talking about all the time with this stuff, right?
That's very true. We were at
I don't think
Philadelphia
we ever
Comic-Con.
made such a claim either, right?
No, but you mentioned, obviously, there's a podcast, right? So in your arena, in the realm of advertising, how is it used? How is it promoted? How do they use it for promotion? have you ever had a client that had a podcast that wanted it advertised? Is there anything you could give on in this specific arena?
I've had clients do both. Predominantly, they will sponsor podcasts, right? And I would say the most successful advertisers within podcast have used the talent within the podcast to promote the product live, right? Live read. When you insert a pre-recorded ad, nobody pays attention. Skip right through it, right? The most successful podcasts, they have a formula and a structure to them. And I would say that's something we should talk about here is putting in a little bit more structure. I've only listened to one podcast, and I'm obviously participating in this one. I don't know what your roles are. And I think that's something that you should figure out. Like, you guys are a pretty good looking boy band, but I need to know who the lead singer is. I need to know who the jock is. I need to know, who's the romantic, right? Who's the fashionista? Like, you guys have to have defined roles so that when people are listening, they know what they're going to get from Ed. They know what they're going to get from you, Gary. Like, that's what you need. You need to have these defined roles, these defined personas. And that means that sometimes you're probably not going to voice an opinion on a place where you might want to interject because your role is going to be a little bit different. I think having those defined personas so people know what they're going to get, people are going to identify with different.
Almost the same as a radio show.
Absolutely.
Right? Like,
Absolutely.
you always knew, in the morning show, who's who. The funny one, the serious one, the tech one.
Yeah, I think you need that. I think you need to define the structure of the show a little bit more because you want to break it up into sections, right? So today we're going to talk about X and Y and Z. First, we're going to talk about X. Complete X, move on to Y. Complete Y, move on to Z. And then wrap it all up, right? Tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them, right?
I think he might be saying we suck.
No, not at all.
No, it's an evolution. It's
It's a work in progress, man.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Fair point.
No, but I like it.
Yeah. I mean, if we're here, trying to, lead the younger generation in terms of, what they should do and how they should, have their mindset, then part of that mindset is being open to criticism and open to feedback. So we ourselves need to model that.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
Yep.
So who's the fashionista?
That's scary.
Clearly. I couldn't get underwear on for today's.
No,
TMI.
let's talk
definitely
about
not me.
that. Let's talk about that for a second. I guess if I would, Ed might be the easiest one not to put in a box, but in terms of just consistency, religious background. I know where your moral compass is all the time. I know that we're not going to get many, if any, F-bombs out of you.
Fun and fantastic will fly out of my mouth all the time.
There you go. So it's wholesome Ed. It's wholesome Ed. All right, guys. So that was the easy one. I'll leave the rest of the four to you.
I mean, I guess the key would be, maybe he doesn't know the origin, but the origin of this, even though he said at the start, was more Ray, right? He had the formula in his head, right? So he asked for help and in variety of levels, the house, the room, whatever. But I think the beauty of the podcast is that a lot of people can't be sort of put in that thing. That's why you lend your advice to other people for different reasons, right? So if you need it, I think it more becomes like almost like a gimmick, And I would ask Ray, does he even want it to be associated with certain gimmicks before we even decided to go that route?
And I don't know if when Brian said that if it needs to be extremely strict, but if we play along for a minute, I'll say, look, when the origin of this first was somebody who can talk about anything related to fixing stuff, right? And that's Johnny, right? Mm-hmm. Electrical, plumbing, HVAC, blah, blah, blah. So he's the fixer, he's the engineer, or what, I don't know what the word is or what the role is, Brian, if you have any advice, but he's the fixer, right?
So we got two, Wholesome Ed, Fixer Johnny.
So we got Wholesome Ed, Fixer Johnny, right? Then there was Gary, right?
I'm Gary.
The extremely healthy, physically fit humorist of the group, right? So that's what I thought about for Gary. Adam is generally speaks better than most people, knows a little bit about everything and a lot about lots of things, and is going to always say something unexpected. So that's the role he played.
I'm not.
And as for me, I don't really have anything that I'm special at. I think I'm just the guy that glues things together.
Well, I think it could be realistic Ray.
I would,
because I think we've always seen you.
I would say realistic, unjudgmental Ray.
Yeah,
he accepts everything.
Practical.
Yes.
Realistic, emotionless, logical, realistic Ray.
Yeah.
Right. And I will give a little pushback on that, recommendation, Brian, about the roles, in terms of the boxes, we put ourselves in. When we had our original meeting, we were just kind of talking through things. We had a few Gen Zers in the room. And at the end, I thought to myself, well, come on, that had to be boring for them to listen to. And we asked them, what did you guys think? And that small little sample of Gen Zer said, wow, that was great. And I said, come on, really? Why would you say it's great? And they said, because it was organic. In which case I had to go home and ask my kids, what does that mean, organic? Like, that's usually something I see in the health food store. And they always say, Dad, that means real, authentic. And I was like, well, I was just talking with my friends for like a half hour. And they're like, yeah, that's what they want. We want things to be organic. And so, although I certainly think your feedback is great, with your experience in marketing, I question if everybody else is doing that in order to separate ourselves and set us apart, that if we are truly organic and not setting ourselves within a box, maybe that might be our niche right there.
But just the same, we can't just be some five-headed monster where we're all saying the same kind of thing, right?
But we're not.
Yeah,
we're not. I guess in the course of our natural conversation, do those 5 different perspectives manifest enough? Or is it something we should refine just a little bit?
I think, at least from the episodes that we've had so far, the nice thing about it is that we are different. But what it really models for the listeners, young and old, is that we disagree on a lot, and yet we come together for the things that we do agree on, and we disagree respectfully, which I think doesn't really exist too much.
But I'm thinking, I feel like we're straying from what Brian was saying. It sounded like Brian was talking about us and having, roles just because of who we are. And I think we all have those. It doesn't mean that it would change the topics of conversation or the points we're trying to make. Right. So Brian, what do you think about that?
I understood it that way too.
Wait, let me, before we get the real answer from Brian, maybe it's something that's already happening, and just to guide the audience, there's a reference to Ed as wholesome Ed.
But what if I drop an F-bomb and say, that's fantastic?
It's never but it's never,
I'm not sure if you've ever done that.
It's never going to happen. And if we say,
but if it did happen, it would be extraordinary.
Right. And then if we refer to Fixer Johnny, he doesn't have to change anything he's doing, because most of what he's talking about is about kind of looking at things from the mechanical perspective about how to fix things. I think on our 55-minute discussion on ceiling
now
fans,
it went to 55.
Yeah,
we went from 30 to 35.
We got to add 5 minutes every time, Johnny.
It's like the big fish story. It gets bigger every time.
Johnny, corralled at least 45 minutes of that for himself by fixing a ceiling fan. So I think it may be simply a matter of just kind of pushing I don't like the word label, but just giving the audience a little more reference by using those monikers every once in a while. I don't know. And then us not having to do anything different because we're already coming at it from that perspective.
But do you see anything coming down in the industry that we would then spend all this time, structure ourselves and be like, podcasts are obsolete, this is coming next? Is there something like that exists? Or
I'm terrified of AI. Right. I think that's going to disrupt everything. There's no reason I couldn't create 5 personas with 5 AI generated points of view that couldn't sit around and have like these little voice boxes talk to each other. Right. That's coming.
Don't get any ideas, Stevie. We need our paychecks.
Yeah. But I mean, that's going to come across all channels. Like the writers.
So that's like the extreme,
now,
right? But is there
have AI
is there any other media that exists that's similar? Because I'll be honest, I don't hear podcasts. That's not a habit that I have. So it's like even this is like, all right, I know that they do it. You see it on Instagram, a lot of little snippets of video. Is there anything else that people are doing?
Ed, you nailed it, right? Authenticity. This is the medium where you're getting that, right? Social media like Instagram, TikTok, that's all fake, right? People are spending 3 hours to get one shot for Instagram, right? Having an in-depth, real conversation, like this is the place that's happening, right? And I agree, like it is all about this authenticity, and you guys are killing it on that. What I'm getting at is when I was listening, and again, I'm an audience of one from a podcast of one, right? One episode, that hearing more of a defined difference between y'all on topics was a little bit more challenging in that one. And over time, I'm sure I'd be able to tease that out on my own. But Adam, when you're talking about it's just adding the structure, like I would suggest, the lead singer, a host, guiding the questions and addressing each of you by name and framing the questions in a way that would draw out your persona more. So, if I was phrasing the question to you, Johnny, I'd be coming at it from more of that, that hands-on, understanding how to fix things. I would come at it from a different perspective than if I was asking, Adam, who has an engineering background, on how to fix something, maybe more theoretical, right? So it's just about framing it a little bit more and putting a little bit more structure on how things are discussed, how the questions are framed, just so that the audience gets a better understanding. Okay, now I know who's talking, and I know the perspective that it's going to come from.
So let me give that a shot. So, for example, I might ask Ed, "Hey Ed, will I burn in hell for A, B, C, and D?" Whereas I would ask Johnny, "Will I get electrocuted if I do this or that?" And I would ask Gary, "If I go from running 7-minute miles to 4-minute miles overnight, am I going to bust my heart open and die?" Right? So it each focuses on their own kind of background. Right. Okay. I think I just wiped myself out 3 times there. But beyond.
So, Brian, I was going to ask you, I think that is a really good point, that you were making about trying to draw out each other's, personalities with the questions that we ask. And I think that's something that we can definitely do moving forward. And I think Gary also made a good point earlier about making sure that the person's not present. It's hard to kind of get a word in. So what do you think on that, Ray?
Wait, Ray, before you go, the question for you would be, should I do any of these things? And you'd give me the realistic answer. No, no, and no.
So I'm taking lots of notes. I do agree with Gary that it's a little bit harder. And I was going to make sure I made a mental note that I was going to be part of the discussion, right, and not be left out just because I'm remote. And it's still hard. So we do have to. I think the structure thing is a good point. And I do have notes on this, Brian. So appreciate it.
So, Brian, how do you feel about segments? A couple of times we were talking about trying to incorporate segments into the show. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. Yeah, the average human attention span is equal to a goldfish, right? It's 7-8 seconds. So
is that much?
An hour-long block,
mine's about 3.
right? I know, right? So an hour-long block, that's a long time for you all to actually stay focused on a topic and have a meaningful discussion, right? Without zoning out. It's equally as hard for a listener, right? Probably even more so because most people are doing something else while they're listening, right? So breaking it up into bite-sized segments is a lot more valuable. It also helps you in the future, right? If you have, if you've touched on the same topic in 8 different episodes, well, what if you want to do a compilation episode later? If you've got them in these nice, cool little segments that you can just put them all together and be here's all the times we talked about this particular topic.
That's a great point.
It makes it easier in the future to do fun stuff like that too.
So what about segment length? I mean, clearly it's got to be more than 7 seconds, less than an hour. Two questions.
9 seconds.
It's between. It's in the range.
What's the ideal length, and does it need to be relatively constant, or can it?
How long do you want your show to be? Typically, an hour?
I think it was supposed to be 45 minutes to an hour.
I think an hour is too long.
I think an hour is too long.
I don't think
I'm hanging out talking with my friends. They just record me for whatever time they want.
Yeah, I would say whatever you want it to be, man. Record double.
We do.
Yeah,
I'll tell you that.
We sit here as long as we keep going.
I listen to podcasts that I really like, but they're 2 to 3 hours, and every time I don't even want to listen. I can't get into it for that long unless I'm driving. And how often are you driving for 2 or 3 hours?
Right.
So I don't listen to them as much.
So is it 30 minutes? Is it 45 minutes?
I like 30 to 40.
And then does it need to be the same every time? Because if
3 seconds.
This is great. I got a 33-minute commute. It's perfect time for I get my podcast in. But if our episodes are 30 minutes, then 43 minutes, then 20 minutes, then 50 minutes,
I don't think that's going
to screw me up.
No.
Well, that's the question for our expert. Is that important to have relatively similar durations?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, you cover a topic.
What do we need him for? Gary knew the answer to that.
Make sure it's interesting.
Right.
So.
When it's no longer interesting, you end it.
So, Brian, I have a question for you that I've been wrestling with since we started this. So when they asked me about the podcast, I said, well, what's a podcast? And I don't really listen to any. So since then, a few folks have mentioned to me, oh, maybe you should listen to a podcast. And my thought has been, well, I don't want to do that, because if I'm going to be authentic, then I need to be me. I don't want to listen to a podcast and try and be somebody else, because clearly that's not me.
That's like saying I want to be an actor, but I'm never going to watch a TV show or a movie because I don't want to.
But I love my job. I have no desire to give up or change what I'm doing for a living. So what are your thoughts on that? Do you think we should be watching podcasts to get pointers and ideas, or do you think just be yourselves?
It doesn't matter. Either way. I mean, I like listening to them just because I'm hearing authentic voices, right? And I'm getting news and information that I'm not going to get in other places, because you're getting the depth. And I do hear things that influence the way that I think constantly, more so than I would if I was getting my information from other sources, right? So there are other financial podcasts out there. There are tons of them. I think it'd be interesting to listen to them so you could know, like, what are they missing?
This is my thoughts when you listen to other people doing what we're doing, similar, like financial stuff. And then we're not only doing financial, is that it's, hey, I have $20 million and I'm going to tell you how to make $20 million. And we're like, no, we just are successful enough that we could retire or have comfortable lives. And here's all you need to do. So it's a lot more simple and what more people can do.
And we're not selling, well, I guess we are selling a product, but the product we're selling is kind of self-improvement, confidence in yourself, have the courage to go against the grain. We're not selling some book for $19.95 or some magic pill for $29.95.
Where can I get that?
I'm out.
So I just want to take a step back.
Where do you think I got my money from? No, kidding.
I would like to know a little bit more about you, Brian. We know that you are in advertising, but beyond that, tell us a little bit more.
Well, I'm actually no longer in advertising as of a month ago.
You're what?
No longer in advertising as of a month ago.
Are you retired?
Semi. I am actually going to be starting my own business. I'm incorporating next week.
Well, let's go back to the exit from advertising.
Yeah.
What are the details on that?
All right. So, well, like I said, I've been doing it for 26 years. I've been looking for a way to get out for 25 and a half.
Well, you've been very poorly. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, it's all about, you guys have mentioned it, having the balls to like do something different, right? Being a little bit brave, like putting a little bit more faith in yourself to do something different. You know, I rose through the ranks. I made it to senior partner, VP, whatever the titles, right? Like the titles don't mean anything, but you know, I was very successful. You know, ran departments. I ran all of Canada for a while for one agency.
And you could almost see it from your office, as I understand. Where was your office?
Well, my last office was in Freedom Tower, 66th floor. Nice views. Yeah, I at 40, I promised myself, this is it. I'm done. I'm getting out at 40. But I had no idea what I wanted to do. Like I was like, this is all I know how to do. I don't know how to start a business. I don't know how to change careers. I'm stuck. This is what I'm doing, making good money. I'll just struggle through it. I decided, okay, I'll change my agency. I'll move to another agency. I grew up in large agencies, big fancy clients. I'm going to move to a small agency. That'll be my big change.
What was the struggle? That you didn't like the work, or that it was too hard, or that the people in the industry, or the hours? Like, what was the struggle?
So it's extremely cutthroat, severely corporate and political, right? And it is, there are very few jobs at the top of the food chain. Right? There's a million people at the bottom, and it really narrows down. Every couple of years you look around and, you know, you're getting older and older. By the time I was 40, I was one of the oldest people in the agency.
Wow.
By the time I was at 40, when was it? 42, I decided I'm done with the big agency life. I'm going to move to a small agency. So I did. Turns out the only person in that agency older than me was the CEO. So I walked in and I was the only parent in the agency.
42 is pretty old.
For advertising, it's extremely old. And I was the only parent in the agency. So, you know, now I'm looking around and I'm like, I'm old enough to be the father to some of the kids here. And, you know,
and you may have been, depending on what happened in the bathtub.
Wait, that could be.
Can we back up 1 second? How old are you? Are we allowed to ask that?
I just turned 50 a month ago.
Happy birthday. Happy belated birthday.
Oh, wow.
So you changed
he's
jobs
younger.
for your 50th birthday.
Essentially, I did. But so what happened was I went to a smaller agency. I had risen to the top of the agency, essentially. I still had my CEO, but it was essentially he and myself running the agency for the most part. The way that it was presented to me was that he was the head of the business. If he left, all the clients would leave. But I was the heart of the business. If I left, all of the talent would leave, right? Which is, why I was able to survive as long as I did, is I put the focus on where I did have energy, where I did still have ambition and curiosity, which was managing teams, growing people, focusing on developing talent. The challenge is when you're in a small agency, you can't just do the things that you love. You've got to do other things that suck. And that's true of any job, right? Mm-hmm. And that comes with the territory. And that's where the stress starts to build up, right? People say, follow your passions. Honestly, I never had passion for advertising. Not once. I have passion for the actual advertising. I had passion for the people. I had passion for the talent, passion for the people I worked with. I was put in charge of all of Canada when I was 46.
Could you see it from your window on the 67th floor?
No, at this time
Montreal?
I could not. So I actually had offices in Toronto and in Montreal.
Oh, very nice.
So in March, about 1 week after my 46th birthday, I was on a dual trip where I went to Toronto and then Montreal. In Montreal, I was visiting my team there and having dinner at a steakhouse. Of course, a steakhouse with my clients, because during dinner at the steakhouse, while clogging my arteries, I ended up having multiple heart attacks during the dinner.
Oh my goodness!
Didn't know it. I knew I felt like crap, but I didn't know what it was. It's never like what they tell you see in the movies, right? In the movies, it's like always the dude grabbing the chest or like whatever. No, I was just like, oh man, I just got to take a dump or something. Like I you don't know.
That's a heart attack dump. Same thing.
It's like the same thing. I have no idea, right? I'm like, I know I feel like crap.
So there was no specific localized pain.
Nah, like my shoulder, my arms, then like my chest, then my stomach. It was just like, a general feeling of like I ate something that I probably shouldn't have, right?
The steak.
Yeah, which is true to an extent over the course of 40 years. But so I was having multiple heart attacks and then went back to the hotel and I was like, I'm not sure if I'm going to wake up tomorrow. What do I do? Like, should I call an ambulance? I'm like, nah, I'll just sleep it off. Genius, right? Slept it off. Oh woke up in the morning. I was feeling a little bit better. Walked the 2 blocks to my office and was starting to work with my team and it started to come back. Starting to feel like garbage. And I was supposed to fly home either that night or the next day in the morning.
Wait, but did you ever take a dump that first night?
I don't remember.
Because it still could have been the dump.
Yeah.
Filled up at this point.
Could have been.
Are you sure it was a heart attack?
I wasn't at the time, but and I still have my doubts to this day. The open heart surgery and the experience after that would say that I did, but I honestly,
you had surgery, like open heart surgery for that?
Yeah. So
Did they crack you open?
Yeah, I did. Oh yeah, I did. Actually,
wait, we're getting ahead of ourselves. So so you're walking into work and you're feeling it.
Yeah,
again
I'm feeling it. I felt it at work. So I called the airport and I booked an earlier flight. So instead of using the what is I now know world-class medical treatment that was several blocks away in Montreal, I got on a plane, flew my ass home, and then drove myself to a crappy community hospital that was a mile from my house at home. Right?
And they did the surgery for you?
No, they did not.
So wait. So how was the flight?
The flight was miserable. So my wife and my sister-in-law, her sister, are both nurses. My sister-in-law is actually a cardiac nurse. So I called her and I'm like, I don't know. I feel like crap. I don't know what this is. Maybe it's my heart or something. She's like, go get some aspirin. So I'm in the airport. In Canada, you can get some really strong stuff over the counter that you can't get here. So I bought this Canadian aspirin. Turns out that saved my life. If I had bought American baby aspirin, I wouldn't have made the flight home.
Wow.
So the fact that I bought shit that's illegal here in the US, and the doctors, when I got to the hospital, did you take anything? And I'm like, yeah, it's in my coat pocket. They pull out where the hell did you get this? You can't buy this here. And it turns out that's what actually got me to survive long enough to get to the hospital.
So wait, so that made the flight was smooth, no issues?
No, the flight was miserable. I was feeling terrible the whole way on the flight. And I didn't want to be that guy ding, ding, is there a doctor on the flight? You don't want to be the guy ringing the call bell.
That'd be embarrassing.
Guy dying.
Better to die.
Yeah. I figured there would have been, at least that would have made the news.
You got to man up. Yeah.
So I landed in Newark, drove myself to the hospital, and they found out very shortly. They're like, yeah, you've had multiple heart attacks. It looks like you're still struggling. So they put me on.
Brian.
Yes.
What does multiple mean? 2, 3, or 23?
I don't know. It doesn't matter. Like they were like, you've been having a heart attack for it looks like 3 days. So apparently it started before I even went to Canada, but I didn't know.
When was the pain? So was it just this overall bad feeling, or was
Yes.
it ever like a, piercing, intense
Never.
pain?
It was intense, but it wasn't piercing, and it wasn't like local enough for me to go like that's my heart. And what's interesting is when I was in the hospital, I was in the hospital for a very long time because I had a lot of complications. I had quadruple bypass. One of the bypasses failed. Like it was a long stay. So I had a lot of roommates. I would ask every roommate the same question. Did you know that you were having a heart attack at the time? Nobody did. Everyone thought it was indigestion.
You were 43 or 46?
I was 46.
46.
Yeah.
So my aunt's husband in Florida, he woke up in the middle of the night and he was like sweating. He's like, got up, felt kind of weird, and went to the kitchen, got me a glass of water, sat on the side of the bed for a while, and when he went for his physical, they told him he had a heart attack, and if he wouldn't have woken up, he probably would have died.
Why?
They say that around that 4 o'clock area in the morning, where you're the certain sleep cycle, if you go to sleep through it, it's like the same statistic when they change the daylight savings and stuff that it happens at that time frame.
So he didn't know.
No, so he didn't know either. He just had like this, like when you're cold, like that cold feeling on your body. And he's like, you know what? I should go to the doctors eventually. And I think he went like 2 or 3 weeks later. And they said,
2 or 3 weeks.
That I heard that so many times from other people. And it was always the guys that had no clue.
And he's the opposite. Like
So I have a
crystal clean diet, thin, like very
It could be
interesting.
hereditary, but so I don't know your history. Did you have a heart attack? Was it a hereditary thing, a genetic thing? Or was it lack of exercise, lack of eating healthy, all of the above?
So it was a lot of it had to do with just the work, the stress of work. And because of that, my eating habits weren't great. Because of that, my exercise habits were crap.
Your sleep
Right.
probably was
So
terrible.
sleep was terrible. Right. I was on an awful schedule. Waking up in the middle of the night, panicking and grabbing, when we had Blackberries, like grabbing the Blackberry, right. And being like, I got to go, I have to check it because there's something, I know there's something wrong.
So it took you
going on.
4 more years to say, I don't want to do this
So
anymore?
that's the thing. I told myself I wasn't going back.
You have to let the listeners know what a BlackBerry is. Some of those younger listeners may not know. They think it's got
They're
It's like a
really-
blueberry, but it's darker.
They're really sweet. They're really sweet. They taste great. They're bigger than raspberries.
And they called it a
and they're black.
crackberry too.
Yeah, this would be
It
before
was a
your,
crackberry.
before your iPhones.
That little
It was the predecessor.
freaking red light
Yeah,
would start
yeah.
blinking and you'd be like, God damn it, I have an email and I have to check it, right? I got to stop that light.
For point of reference, it was the predecessor to the smartphone. It was the almost smartphone.
No, it was
Mostly
smart.
for emails.
It was
It was mostly
smart.
emails.
That wasn't that smart.
I had 3 of them from where they were full blown
Well, if you put them
smartphones.
together, maybe they're smart. But
Well, they evolved, but
Yeah, the last one, the torch was a full.
They were great. And I'll be honest, like I actually prefer that to what we have now
Yes.
because like that, all it was for me was email, and you could use it as a phone, but really, I mean, come on, nobody uses a smartphone as a phone either.
Brian.
Yeah.
What about your adaptation? Like, let's go. You can't prefer the old stuff. Let's go.
Well, that's why I didn't survive in advertising. I couldn't freaking adapt, man. The dinosaur by the time I hit 50. I didn't want to go back. I had a horrible experience in the hospital. First of all, just a word of advice. Like if you live anywhere near a university hospital or like a highly rated hospital, go there. Do not go to the community hospital if you feel like you're having some sort of emergency. Because they couldn't even draw blood correctly. I was the only person in history that really honestly thought that I went in for a heart attack, but I was going to die of stab wounds, man. They just could not freaking get the syringe in properly. It was ridiculous. And they were like addicted to the stupidest things, the nurses. They check you. I'm in there for a heart attack, right? Like I've obviously got issues, right? They've got me on all these drips and stuff. All they really cared about was how much I peed that day, right? Constantly. How much did you pee today? How much did you pee today? So, the food sucks in hospitals. They had the gall to give me lemon Jello for dinner one night. Yellow Jello. Who the hell wants yellow Jello?
don't they all taste the same?
I don't know. But it was,
Green. Now, green.
yeah, the
no,
only thing
green
worse
is
is
the best.
green.
So the yellow jello, the most disgusting thing on the planet. Well, I was getting pissed off at the nurses for coming in every 5 minutes. Have you peed? Have you peed? How much have you peed? Yeah, exactly. You know where I'm going with this. I took the yellow jello and I put it into the, the pee thingy. And I was like, nurse, I finally peed, but I think I'm dehydrated. You got to turn up there. She comes in, she's like, I'll be right back. She runs down, like nurses aide runs out. I got like 5 nurses, 6 doctors piling into the room. The doctor's looking at me like, you son. Like they can tell.
I like that one.
But yeah, try not to go to the community hospital.
How about try not to go?
That would be even better. I would suggest not having a heart attack in
Yeah.
the first place.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, it sounds like
I
it really pissed
should
you
have
off.
thought of that.
All right, keep. I want to hear.
Yeah, so I after going through a pretty long ordeal, it took about 7 months to get through it all. Because, like I said, I had a failed bypass. I had to go back in. I had multiple surgeries. I decided, all right, well, I need to make some money, so I'm going to go back part time. There's no such thing as part time. So I went back.
Suck you in.
Right. I went back to my CEO and he's like, I would love to have you part time. This would be great. And I was like, okay, but it's really part time. He's like, okay, you don't have to manage Canada anymore. I'm like, you just got to manage New York. I'm like, great. Great. New York's easy. Right. So, I went right back into managing about, 30, 40 people, 5 or 6 clients, somewhere in the neighborhood of $100, $150 million budgets across the year. There's no such thing as part-time. When clients are spending that kind of money with you and you have that amount of people working for you, they all need your time. They have questions. There are processes that need to be followed and you have to wait on other people constantly. And what if that gets done on a Saturday morning? You've got to be there, got to be available. So I ended up leaving that job once again saying, okay, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm going to go freelance. I was like, okay, I can actually name my hours now. I'm going to go freelance. Let's do 20 hours a week, 25 hours a week. And I can name my price, which is fantastic, right? The problem with freelance, it's very similar. It's a project that they give you to do. And they don't care how many hours it takes. You can tell them that you have, 20, 25 hours a week. But if you're going to do this project and the project has a deadline, well, you're going to go over those hours.
But you're making a lot of money.
I was making very good money. But I was putting in full-time hours again. And I didn't want to do that. But I was doing it without the benefits of a 401k. I was doing it without all the, the other benefits you get for a full-time job, no vacation, So I ended up going back into it. I went and worked for the same parent company, but a different agency that I was with previously.
You need that gif of, but they keep pulling me back in.
Essentially, that's what was happening.
Steve, you got to
Well, in
paste
the
that
last one, he pulled himself back in.
So I did. And I was only there for about 2 years. And as soon as I got there, I knew it was a mistake. Day one. Looked around. There was nobody other than the principals of the company were over 40. I mean, I was reporting to people that were in their early 30s. Most of my team were significantly younger than me, and they were way more advanced than me when it came to the use of technology. Technology is running everything now. Everything's big data, and it's the manipulation of that data, and then using that data and algorithms to target people in very scary ways. Your phones are listening to you. They really are. I was ethically more and more opposed to what was happening from a data usage standpoint and targeting standpoint. And I was also just ill-informed as to how it all worked. And when you're reporting, when you have people who are 20, 25 years younger than you, and they know more than you about the technology, and you walk up to them and say, can you teach me? They're intimidated, right? You've got the big fancy title, you got the office with the view. For whatever reason, they're just not as open to teaching you as you would think. They expect you to know all these things.
Is intimidated the right word?
Or just frustrated. Look at this old dinosaur. Like, I don't want to waste my time teaching him all this stuff.
Here's a cane in a wheelchair, old man.
Right.
I think that's a great example of the old blacksmith and cobbler lessons that they could have learned.
Exactly. It really is that scenario. So the industry was just passing me by anyway. And the stresses of it were just far too great. I knew I was heading down the same path with my health again, and turned 50, and that's it. I'm out.
So what is this new business you're doing?
So
Advertising on its own, freelance.
no, actually, so I decided I wanted to open up a business, but I don't know anything about running a business, right? And I don't know what business to open. So I met with a coach who has contracts with over 250 franchises all around North America, right? Everything from pet grooming to nail salons to window washing to.
I thought you were going to tell me something like McDonald's.
No. These are all like the smaller businesses that really don't have the huge marketing budgets, but you interact with them every day, right? Like you go to an auto body shop, like a Jiffy Lube or whatever, like all that stuff. Those are franchises that he has contracts with, over 250 of them. So he set me up to meet with a bunch of franchises, some that were going to be startups, some where it was somebody retiring, wanting to sell their business. And I met with a bunch of them. They were all very appealing. But I actually developed an interesting relationship with the coach who was actually helping me find the right franchise.
How did you get this coach?
The magic of LinkedIn.
Oh, you looked for somebody and found.
So they found me. They saw that I was open to work. So they found me. It was actually one of his virtual assistants from the Philippines that found me and connected me to him. So we'd been talking about all these different business opportunities. I had been meeting with different owners. I'd been meeting with different franchise developers. And the more and more I was having conversations with the coach, the more the idea of being a coach became appealing to me and helping to find people, because that's what was keeping me in advertising for so long, was being a coach, right? Being a mentor. Couldn't do that anymore because the technology had passed me by. Now I was begging to be taught and be mentored by like a 23-year-old right out of college. But here's where I can actually add value, right? Here's where I can actually still mentor and coach people. But now I am going to become a coach. I'm becoming a business owner of my own.
So
with these
this is a franchise in itself.
It is.
Okay.
So you're
It is.
going to be coaching people for advertising, just in life.
No, I'm going to be coaching people to open new businesses.
So you're going to do what we're doing on our podcast, but individually with people.
Individually with people. I'm going to be taking middle-aged people who are aging out of their lifelong careers and teaching them to own their own business.
So
Teach them how to do it and what business to do.
you're kind of sort of like matching them to a particular franchise that
Correct.
you feel is best suited for them, and they feel is best suited for them.
Yes.
Brian, are you just doing the matching, or are you actually coaching them on how to do it? Because if we were asking the hard questions, we'd say you've never done it. So what are you actually doing?
So there is a coaching process that you go through that helps define, you take personality tests. So you'll guide people through these personality tests. You'll guide them through understanding what their strengths are, what their skills are that are transferable. And then you go through a long process of talking them through all the different franchise opportunities that are either geographically relevant to them, that match their history, their skill set, their personas, that where you think they would most likely succeed. And then you are actually matching them to owners, to franchise developers, to actually talk to them and hopefully invest in a business.
But in addition to the real world experience that you have, aren't there any additional credentials or training you need to be able to administer these tests and get these matches?
Yes, I actually am going for a 90-day training cycle, and it is ongoing, obviously, but I have to go through a 90-day training cycle before I am a fully accredited coach, and that's going to start in July.
Congratulations. That's, the key is, you kept saying that you started it and, 25 and a half, you were trying to get out.
Yeah.
Hopefully this is something that fulfills you. Because I have to say, even though I'm mechanically inclined and where I work, there's always that thing in the back of my mind. I should be doing something else. Mm-hmm. And I never actually know what that is.
You can
It's an
hire him as a
interesting
coach.
thing.
He'll tell you.
Yeah.
So with your experience at 26 years in marketing and advertising, and then the 25 and a half of trying to get out, in terms of younger listeners, if they're listening, what life lessons that you've learned would you pass on to someone else and say, this is something you need to keep in mind. This is something you want to be mindful of. If it's not on your radar, you're not thinking about, you should be thinking about this.
Couple of things. One is, to me, I boil it down to two things to be successful in anything you do. And I mentioned it before, ambition and curiosity. right? If you have both of those things, you will be successful no matter what path you choose, right? The challenge is maintaining those two things at a pretty high rate, right? Once you start to lose your ambition or your curiosity or both, it's time to make a move. I had lost that a long time ago, but I just didn't have the cojones to actually make the move.
So it's hard to give up a good paying job.
Right.
It is.
In retrospect, do you think you should have split 6 months into the advertising gig, or now, or in retrospect, are you happy because you got a big pile of dough and you have the opportunity to do some things that you want?
So it has afforded me a pretty good lifestyle, so I can't deny that. But knowing what I know now about starting a new business, I wish I had started many, many years ago. Many years ago. I didn't know that there were other options out there that you can do without having a pile of cash to sit on, right? You know,
But the challenge is doing that at 22, 25, you don't have the life experience. No matter what industry or career you're in, there's something to be said about just going through it and experiencing ups and downs and challenges and problems and working through that. You just don't have that
but you wouldn't experience that in your own business?
You absolutely would, but you wouldn't necessarily have the tool set to resolve those issues if you hadn't been through it under another employer where it really doesn't count, or you have somebody else has your back.
But you don't have to
Adam,
go
I
into
think,
business by yourself either.
I also have a interesting discussion I had the other day with a neighbor, high school kid who's, approaching college age. And I said, hey, what are you going to be doing? And he said, he's going to be doing finance. And I said, where are you going to school? And he said, oh, I'm not going to go to school. I'm going to start my own business. And I said, well, what are you going to do? And his answer was power wash houses. Right?
That's not finance, is it?
In his mind, being his own owner of a business was finance, right? He's going to do his own thing, make his own money. The job was actually just the means, right? But it's not the perspective that most people have, when they think about it. And like what Adam was just saying, what Brian was just saying, having the experience to go start a business, like maybe you don't need it, right? Maybe we just think you do. Maybe we just don't, we're all too chicken to do it because our parents didn't do it and our friends didn't do it and we didn't get to watch anybody else do it. So it just seems like this foreign thing.
I have a question because you all come from different backgrounds, but we've got at least two of you are engineers, right? I don't know.
Well, I think only one of us actually still,
right.
at least pretending to be an engineer.
Okay.
Raise
Well,
nothing.
then for I guess for all of you, when you got out of college and you had a profession in mind, or you were trained in a profession, how proficient were you day one at the job? Were you firing on all cylinders?
Well, it's a complicated answer. So the first day, my work day probably started at 8 a.m. At 7:59, I knew everything, of course. By about 8:02, 180 degrees. I didn't know shit. But I did have a toolbox that would help me figure everything out and eventually get there.
Now, if you were to come out of school, or instead of going to school, you went 4 or 5 years of school, that's a hell of an investment. If you had taken that money and bought, let's go back to 1941 when you graduated college.
Yes.
And you bought a Dunkin' Donuts with that money because it was affordable at that time, right? You don't know shit about running a Dunkin' Donuts, but it's a franchise and it has a system that you will be trained in and you could follow. How would that have been different? It's a toolbox, right? It's this, the same level of investment, but you can learn and grow over time with that as well. Like, I don't know that there's a huge difference in terms of, the model for learning and the model for growing that life experience.
I think the only thing
it's just
in
a
that
different
example
angle.
It's a fair point.
Getting the money is the only thing in that example.
We can get a loan the same. It's not
Same
easy
way
to
of
loan.
college,
Well, your
Not
parents-
as easy.
I don't know what
Business
percentage, but
loan is
parents
not
pay a
as
lot,
easy as college.
But getting a loan when you're 20 or 18 years old is not going to be easy.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's also a cultural thing, right? If you were to tell your parents when you were 17 in high school and said, hey, I want to borrow $80,000 to buy a Dunkin' Donuts instead of $20,000 a year for the next 4 years to go to college, like most parents would just say, you're crazy, you're going to college, right? We'll pay for your college, but I won't pay for the Dunkin' Donuts. So I think, Brian, it's a great question and a great point. But culturally, at least in this country, people just don't lean that way, and it makes it that much harder to do that. Whether it's get money from your parents, borrow from somewhere else, it just doesn't work that way, right? There's this.
And Ray, I think
Go ahead,
you used college tuition numbers from 1941 also, so thanks for staying with the theme. We're also assuming, or we should acknowledge the difficulty in getting the loan, the luck that very few people have of parents being able to fund something, and it comes back to that discipline we talked about, that, in your 20s, in your late teens, it's hard. You got to make sure your income is greater than what you're spending, and piling up that first pot of gold that you can invest with is hard work, and there's sacrifice. And there's really no way around it, because even if you get a loan, okay, well, now you're under pressure to pay that back plus interest.
Mm-hmm. And in 1941, loans were like 12%.
I think the other thing. Go ahead, Ray.
Sorry, it's also counterintuitive, right? When you're in your 20s is when you should be taking risks, starting businesses, doing all these things, because if you fail, kind of doesn't matter, right? You don't have kids waiting for you. You don't have a house, maybe, or whatever, right? You're low on the pole of risk.
You go bankrupt really early, nothing to worry about.
It doesn't matter, right? So there's a lot less impediments at that time, right? You're not worried about it. If you quit your job when you're 35 and you've got kids and a house and mortgage and all that stuff, well, then you've got all those things to deal with while you quit your job to buy the Dunkin' Donuts, right? So, I think it just doesn't make a lot of sense. We're just not brought up with the mindset to do those things, even though maybe you should.
One of the most important questions you're going to get, and we're going to end with this one, is, would you rather never have to sleep or be able to teleport?
Teleport.
It's an easy one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sleep is so underrated.
That is the correct answer. Well done.
We all said, well, except from one, we all said the same thing.
Well, yeah, you didn't say that.
I said it would give me an unfair advantage.
You had mentioned the temptation.
And
nobody thinks that way.
He thought it would corrupt him.
I'm impressed by that answer, Adam.
Well,
all right.
Personally, I want to take the time and thank you. We really appreciate when people stop by. They got a lot more things they could be doing. So we thank you for taking time of your busy schedule and giving us your insight. I've learned a lot.
The feedback was great.
Yes.
Thank you for listening to the Attic Static Podcast. If you like what you heard, please like and subscribe, and feel free to leave a comment below. Or come check us out at our website at atticstaticpod.com. And stay tuned for new episodes out every Monday.